The road into Duck Creek Village feels endless. I drove 10 hours to be here, climbing into the mountains, the air thinning with each passing mile, the trees closing in until the world feels carved out of pine and stone. The moment you arrive, something settles in you. The quiet isn't the kind that unnerves. It's the kind that embraces. Now that we are here, I immediately had felt as though the entire village was a true community. There was an odd, welcoming warmth that made me realize how special this little village was, where your neighbors aren't just your friends, but also the owner of the local diner. The local gas station isn't just your gas station, but also your general store and hardware store all in one, where your bread, snacks, even frozen dinners were only feet away from the bolts, screws, and chainsaws. Immediately, I felt as though I wasn't an outsider, but I was family. And for that reason, that feeling, that understanding that the entire town truly is one big family, that is the reason why I want to ensure that this small village's unsolved cold case does not stay in the shadows. And that Courtney Lynne, her family, the community, deserves justice. With cabins tucked between trees and a main stretch that could pass in seconds if you weren't paying attention, but in that stillness lies a story too big to ignore. I didn't come here for the scenery. I came because Duck Creek Village holds the memory of a woman who never made it home, a woman whose story slipped out of headlines far too quickly, a woman whose family still waits in agony for answers that may never come. Her name was Courtney Lynne Townsend, and in November of 2023 she disappeared in these mountains. What was left behind was confusion, fragments, suspicion, and grief. I came here to feel the weight of this place, to understand why the case that haunts this tiny village is still unsolved, and why those who live here believe they know who's responsible, even when the official investigation refuses to say the same. To understand this case, you have to understand Duck Creek Village. This isn't Salt Lake City. It isn't St. George. It's a remote community in Kane County, perched high on Cedar Mountain. Cabins line gravel roads. The air smells like pine needles and wood smoke. Snow blankets rooftops until they sag. And through all of it, there's a sense of community that you only find in towns this small. Neighbors don't just know each other, they rely on one another, they share tools, they clear each other's driveways, they stop to check on you if your lights haven't come on in the evening. When tragedy strikes in Duck Creek, it isn't something that ripples quietly, it crashes, leaving everyone touched. That's why Courtney's disappearance cut so deep. This was not a big city story, it wasn't one crime buried under a dozen more. This was a small town losing one of its own, and in Duck Creek, that's a wound that everyone feels. So who was Courtney? Courtney Lynne Townsend was 32 years old when she vanished. She was small in stature, just 4'11", barely over 100 pounds, but larger than life to those who loved her. Her family describes her as warm and loyal, someone who carried both light and scars. Like many people, she had struggles, but she was not the type to simply disappear without a trace. Her life, like anyone's, was complicated. She had been through a marriage that many say left her hurt and weary. People close to her speak quietly about difficulties at home, about a woman trying to find freedom and a fresh start. There were whispers of an abusive relationship. Neighbors believed she had reached a breaking point, that leaving was not just a decision, but a survival move. This matters because in small towns like Duck Creek, people pay attention. They notice tension. They see when someone is tired, when someone is pulling away. Courtney's disappearance wasn't just another missing person case to her community. To them, it was the culmination of something they already feared. The story begins on November 16th, 2023. Courtney took her mother's car, a Volkswagen Jetta, without permission. That detail alone paints a picture. A woman leaving in a rush, needing to get away, not worrying about consequences. Hours later, she was pulled over in Hurricane, Utah, for speeding. She didn't have a valid license. Records say the stop ended without major incident, but it was the last confirmed sighting of Courtney alive. Her mother, realizing the car was gone, reported it stolen. At the time, it may have seemed like a family dispute, but it would quickly evolve into something much darker. Days later, on November 19th, deputies in Kane County found the car. It wasn't parked neatly by a cabin or pulled over at a gas station. It was off a remote road near Duck Creek Ridge, lodged on rocks and completely burned. The entire vehicle was charred inside and out. But here's what made it stranger. The car was cold. Snow had already fallen across the scene, and there were no footprints in the surrounding area. It was as if the fire had consumed the car in silence, and the snow had erased everything else. Inside and around the car, investigators found items that only deepened the mystery. There were dog tags, a wooden box, a wallet, credit cards, license documents, sunglasses, earrings. Some of these items didn't belong to Courtney at all. The immediate question, why were other people's personal belongings in her burned car, was never answered. But the most glaring absence was Courtney herself. When a car is found burned in a small town, the alarm bells ring loud. Search and rescue teams mobilized. Kane County Sheriff's Office and St. George Police Department worked together. Volunteers came from nearby towns. K-9 units swept through snow and brush. Maps were drawn with grid lines. More than 400 man-hours were logged, and hundreds of miles of ground were covered. But here's the problem. The search didn't start until days after her disappearance, and heavy snow had already fallen. That window of time, the first 24 to 48 hours when evidence is most valuable, was gone. Searchers recall the difficulty. Snow drifts masked footprints. Wind scattered scent trails. Crews pushed through thickets of pine, over ridges, across icy streams. They hoped for anything, an article of clothing, a sign of struggle, even just a direction she might have taken. They found nothing. For the family, each day without answers was agony. For the community, each day was a growing reminder that something terrible had happened, and yet nothing was being done fast enough to solve it. Months passed, the snow melted, and with it came the first discovery. On May 27, 2024, an ATV rider exploring Cedar Mountain came across clothing scattered in the forest. Near it, human remains. Deputies responded. Search and rescue teams deployed again. K-9s picked up scents and guided investigators to fragments of bone. The remains were collected and sent to the Utah State Medical Examiner. On June 12, 2024, dental records confirmed what many had already feared. The remains were Courtney's, but the discovery brought little closure. The remains were partial, fragments only, not enough to determine how she died. Not enough to confirm foul play. The official statement, no evidence of foul play. To the community, that felt like a dismissal. To the family, it was devastating. A year later, almost to the day, another discovery was made. On May 8, 2025, a hunter found more remains about a mile from the first site. Once again, the fragments were confirmed as Courtney's. Once again, they revealed nothing new. The sheriff's office admitted these remains offered no additional insight, no answers about cause of death, no clarity about what had happened. Courtney's family has lived in limbo since 2023. Her sister, Dallas Jimenez, has been the most vocal. She describes it as unbearable. And my heart absolutely pours out to not just her siblings, but her entire family as well. To even think about the pain this tragedy has caused is heartbreaking, and living through this entire experience must be devastating. Each discovery feels like reopening the wound. How do you grieve when you don't know what happened? She asks. The family started a GoFundMe to hire a private investigator. They wrote, "Authorities have exhausted resources, but we still have no answers. The family deserves justice." That's where things stand. The family continues to push for clarity. The system has left them waiting. Community belief 2. Ask around Duck Creek Village, and you'll hear a quiet, unanimous whisper. They believe Courtney's husband was responsible. They point to the history of abuse, to the fact that she was leaving him, to the timing of her disappearance, to the strange details of the burned car and the scattered items. Locals insist this was not an accident, not a case of someone wandering into the woods and succumbing to the elements. But whispers are not evidence. Without forensic proof, without a witness, without a confession, law enforcement has never moved against him. This is where the pain sharpens. The community believes they know the truth. The family believes it too, but belief alone doesn't make a case. And so, the story sits in files, unsolved, unprosecuted, unfinished. In cases like this, people look for federal help. The FBI was rumored to be aware of the case, but there was no confirmed involvement, and that's a wound in itself. Because when a small town loses one of its own, and the trail grows cold, the expectation is that bigger resources will step in. Here, that didn't happen. The snow delayed searches, evidence disappeared, the burned car was never fully explained. The remains were too fragmented to tell a story. At each turn, opportunities for answers slipped away, and the system moved on. For families, this isn't just frustrating, it's betrayal. When agencies step back, when cases are quietly shelved, it feels like the life lost wasn't worth enough effort. Media attention matters. In missing person cases, it can be the difference between closure and cold files. But Courtney's story never caught national fire. Local stations covered it briefly. KUTV, KJZZ, KSL all ran segments. People magazine picked it up for a short article. Local radio station KDXU called it perplexing, describing the remains as fragments stored in a shoebox, but coverage faded. Compare this to high-profile cases that dominate headlines for weeks. Courtney's story slipped from the cycle almost immediately. Without pressure, agencies lose urgency. Without attention, the case risks being forgotten. When I stood on Duck Creek Ridge, I felt the silence. It's beautiful here, quiet, peaceful, calm, but in that silence is grief. This town carries Courtney's absence like a shadow. Her family still waits, the community still whispers, and the files still sit open, but untouched. This isn't a ghost story. It's worse. It's the story of how a woman disappeared, how her remains were found in fragments, how her family was left with nothing but questions, and how the system moved on without them. Courtney deserves better. Her family deserves better. Duck Creek Village deserves better. This is still a cold case, and cold cases should not be forgotten. The Utah Bureau of Criminal Identification still lists Courtney's case. Tips are still accepted. Her story still matters. If you know anything at all, say it. If you can share her story, do it. If you can pressure agencies to re-examine her case, please. Because the truth in the shadows is not about letting stories fade. It's about keeping them alive until justice finds them.
Hey there, everybody. I firstly want to pop in here and just say thank you so much for stopping by the channel, but also for giving any and all unsolved cases just the smallest bit of attention. I only want to cover these types of cases that clearly deserve much more attention, and not for my sake, but the families and the communities involved. So I truly do appreciate the support and your criticism, but this is about Courtney, so down below you will find a direct link to the GoFundMe for her family. Please go support her family. Let them know that Courtney is not forgotten, that we will not rest as a whole until she is brought to justice and her family is given the justice she deserves. The next trip I'll be taking out is going to be a surprise, and I hope you all enjoyed this episode, because believe me, it's only going to get better, and it's not only going to be cold cases, but I wanted to ensure that this case specifically was brought to the public eye. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for stopping by. Go support them. And remember that where there is light, there is always a shadow. So keep your lanterns lit and your eyes open. Until next time, I hope you have an amazing day, guys.